Neighbors heard a piano at 3 amperes. The house was empty. Neighbors heard it first at 3 in the morning. A piano coming through the thin savanna fog, like a voice behind gauze. Bright, deliberate, not a practice scale, but a song shaped by hands that knew what they were asking the instrument to feel. Windows glowed weakly along Jones Street. Porch fans turned lazily, pushing warm air that smelled like iron and rain. The music came from number 119, the Carpenter House, which stood empty, locked, listed, and waiting. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The year was 2019, late August, heat pressing the city flat. The Carpenter House had been vacant since early summer, after an estate sale peeled it of rugs and lamps and the porcelain spaniel that used to guard the hearth. The last owner, a retired piano teacher named Odile Carpenter, had passed in late spring. Her nieces lived up in North Carolina, good people by all accounts, but too far away to keep fresh flowers on the mantle. Realtors came and went with their careful smiles. Contractors measured crown molding and murmured about old wiring. But at 3 in the morning, the house was nobody's, and then very suddenly, everyone's. Caius Mercer lived across the street in an apartment above a bookstore that smelled like paper and cedar oil. He was 37, a sign painter by trade, a listener by habit. At 3:02, he stepped onto his balcony with a glass of water and a small, unreasonable hope that the sound would be a radio left on in a passing car. It wasn't. It had the weight of wood and felt and string. It had the soft, percussive bloom that only happens when hammers strike and then get out of the way. He thought of the names of pieces like someone reciting Saints, Nocturne, Arabesque, Consolation, and then recognized the one it was. Claire de Lune played a hair slower than most, with crescendos that rose like someone standing up carefully from an old chair. He could hear the rubato in the right hand, the left hand anchoring, a conversation between patience and longing. The melody reached for the air over Forsyth Park and came back with a question. Caius put on shoes. On the sidewalk, humidity wrapped him in a damp shawl. Moths battered the street lamp. Down the block, a delivery truck sighed at a stop sign. The music continued. Not perfect, not sloppy. Human. Nora Bly stepped from the shadows of her courtyard with a leash looped around her wrist, her old hound Amos peering from behind her knees. Nora was 68, the kind of neighbor who knows who is supposed to be where and when. She tilted her head. Your radio. Her voice made it a question. Or is that in the house? It's in the house, Caius said, and the words made the night hold itself differently. They were not the only ones. Mr. Patel from the corner bodega came up the steps wiping flour from his hands because insomnia likes small projects, and he had been making dough for morning pastries. On the second floor of a yellow clapboard place, a girl in a college sweatshirt cracked her window and frowned. An Uber drifted past and slowed. Even the driver leaned, listening. At 3:08, Nora called it in. She had a way with dispatchers, polite, precise, impossible to ignore. House is listed vacant, number 119 Jones. We have audible music consistent with a live piano. We are gathering out front. Please send a unit to clear the property. She gave her name, spelled it, gave her number, spelled it, and ended the call with thank you in a tone that made the words into a promise. 2 patrol cars rolled up at 3:17. Blue lights turned low so they washed the houses in a suggestion instead of a demand. Officer Malik Rhodes took the steps 2 at a time, his hair braided neatly, a scar like a grace note at the corner of his mouth. Behind him came Officer Lori Fenwick, steady and compact, the kind of person who never lost track of where the nearest door was. They paused at the front door. The music did not pause. In the short stillness between measures, you could hear the damp city breathing. Let me try the realtor box first, Fenwick said. Odile's nieces had left a lockbox hooked to the iron rail. Fenwick called the on-call number posted on the yard sign, woke a man named Barrett, whose voice came up out of sleep like a diver out of deep water, and got the code. She opened the box, palmed the key, glanced at Rhodes. He nodded. She unlocked the door. Inside, the air moved in waves. The foyer smelled like lemon oil and old paper. A staircase curved up like a question mark. To the left, the front parlor opened wide, and there, by the tall window, sat the piano that had not found a buyer. A nape grand, walnut, its lid propped, its harp gleaming like a good secret. The bench was pulled out, the fallboard was up. No one sat there. But the song did not stop. Rhodes stepped closer, palms open, as if approaching an animal. Fenwick circled wide, eyes on corners and thresholds. Rhodes leaned and looked under the body of the piano the way a child looks under a bed. Empty. No pedals depressed. No one hiding. The music flowed with the serene confidence of someone who had forgotten to be afraid. The keys moved. Not all of them, just the ones the melody asked for, but they moved as surely as if struck by fingers. Rhodes watched a middle C rise and fall. He put his hand near the key, not touching, feeling only the movement of warm air. He swallowed. His throat made a sound like a small door closing. "Player mechanism," Mr. Patel whispered from the doorway, half hopeful. "Some have rolls hidden in the belly." Rhodes eased the bench back with his shin and lifted the front panel below the keys. Inside, felted hammers, whips, jacks, springs, everything that makes a grand, no motor, no roll. No belts, just the old generous mechanics of wood and intention. He let the panel fall softly back into place. The music reached the place where the melody thins into light. Fenwick walked the ground floor with calm hands and an efficient gaze. Dining room empty, kitchen empty, pantry empty, back door closed, latched, chain intact, powder room lonely and clean. Upstairs, a short hall with 2 bedrooms and a study. She went up. Caius waited in the foyer, pulse in his wrists. The house sighed the way old houses do when strangers put weight on old boards. A ceiling ticked. Somewhere a pipe tapped. The piano did not care. It turned a corner into the passage that always lands too beautifully, and Caius felt something behind his ribs try to stand up. Fenwick returned. "No one," she said. Windows latched, closets filled with air and dust. She cut a look at the instrument. The song decelerated like a train entering a station and came to its hush of an ending. The final chord hung and softened and then quiet. They all stood there for the kind of moment that takes its shoes off before it enters a room. Savannah shifted outside. Moths performed their soft violence at the glass. Across the street, a cat made a decision and took it back. Rhodes ran his hand along the piano's cheek as if it were a horse. He said, "I'm going to log this as an unsecured property check, no suspect found, no damage, no sign of forced entry. We'll notify the realtor to have a locksmith rekey and to secure the back windows." He looked at Nora. "We can sit on the block a while. If it plays again, call." Nora nodded. She had that way of nodding that promises she will do more than that. At 4, the block slept with one eye open. At 5, milk trucks wrote their notes on the morning. By 7, Rhodes had told the story to a sergeant who smiled with one corner of his mouth and said, "The city has old bones. Let it have old songs." By 11, Barrett had a locksmith on a ladder checking sashes and pins. At noon, a pair of teenagers in black shirts, tagged with the name of a moving company, carried a rolled rug out to a van and joked too loudly about ghosts the way kids do when they hope fear will think they're busy and pass them by. That night, at 3:01, the music began again. Not Debussy. The opening was older, the cadence stiffer, a Bach sarabande measured like footsteps on a tile floor. Slow, precise, inevitable. Neighbors emerged as if called by the same small bell. Caius took the steps 2 at a time. Nora did not bother with shoes. Officer Rhodes arrived inside 3 minutes, not even pretending he had not parked around the corner to make it easier to be the kind of cop he wanted to be. They found the same room, the same instrument, the same absence of anyone at all. The keys rose and fell, a metronome's mind and a prayer's heart. Rhodes stood at the tail, hand on the rim, feeling the sympathetic thrum in his palm. He mouthed to Fenwick, "You feel that?" and she nodded, jaw tight. When the sarabande ended, there was a brief, polite silence, as if the empty room expected applause. The house had a history, of course. In Savannah, houses accumulate story the way live oaks gather Spanish moss, one breath, and you are clothed in what came before you. Odile Carpenter had bought the name in 1974 with her first real paycheck from the conservatory where she taught. She had trained generations of children to curve their fingers like gentle pals, to count out loud, to breathe through nerves. She had hosted small recitals in the front parlor, little boys in stiff collars, little girls with bows that smiled even when they didn't. Caius knew this because in the weeks after the second night, he took to visiting old Mrs. Beaumont on the next block, who had been Odile's friend since summer dresses cost less than a bus ticket. He brought her ginger tea, she brought him names. Odile did not marry, Mrs. Beaumont said, with the complicated pride some women use to say a woman chose herself. Odile did not need to. She kept afternoons for students and evenings for pieces she wanted to meet again. If you heard music after midnight, it was because her mind had decided to go walking and her hands did not want her to go alone. Caius asked about family, about nieces, about anyone who might have keys. Mrs. Beaumont leaned back. The nieces did right by her. But Odile's real legacy is in the wrists of children, who can now make a room ask for mercy. She smiled. If the house is playing at 3, maybe it's just remembering how to talk. The third night brought rain hard enough to erase chalk from sidewalks. The piano began at 3:04 with something American copland, maybe open and upright as a prairie. The left-hand octaves came like fence posts along a road. Rhodes stood in the hall, dripping on the polished heart pine, and felt the hair along his arms think the thought it thinks before it stands. The sound was too clear, too present, to be a speaker hidden somewhere. He pressed his ear against the underside of the keyboard, reckless and gentle all at once, and listened there. He heard woodworking, felt creak and give. He pulled back and swallowed rain. Fenwick called the lab, not because lab techs solve hauntings, but because she trusted men and women who make their living saying, this is a fact and this is not. The lab sent a sound engineer on the 4th night. He arrived with a small case and an undramatic face, set up microphones, and mapped the way the sound bloomed in the room. He traced it like a weather system. He shook his head, not unhappily. It's a piano, all right. It's hammers striking strings. The waveforms don't lie. He gestured at the action, the fallboard, the keys. If it isn't a person, it's a mechanism I have never met. You'd think it was a player, Mr. Patel offered again, stubborn as a superstition that used to keep you safe. But where's the roll? Nora crouched and put her palm flat on the bare floor in front of the lyre, breath held like a child listening to a secret inside a seashell. She looked up. Feel that. They all did. Not a vibration exactly, more like a miniature version of thunder when it is far and polite. As if the house were a body with a heart beating very, very softly. Caius began to arrive early, at 2:45, with a folding chair and a thermos. He took notes in a small pad he used when hand-lettering menus for restaurants. Tempo, piece, weather, number of listeners. He discovered that the set lists, if that is what they were, made a kind of sense. Debussy the first night, liquid and moonbitten, Bach the second, exacting and austere, American the third, shoulders back. On the 5th night came Chopin, a nocturne in E minor that stepped like someone finding their way through their own house in the dark without turning on the light. On the 6th, Satie, that famous gymnopédie that sounds like someone remembering a conversation and only later realizing what they should have said. On the 7th night, the piano did not play. At 3 o'clock, the block held its breath, and then, shy or wise, let it go. Caius packed his chair, embarrassed at his own hope. Nora turned on her porch light and then, half smiling, turned it back off. The realtor, nervous about liability, scheduled a full inspection the next day. A structural guy with hands like shovels walked the joists and hummed. A piano tech from Tybee Island arrived with a satchel and a reverence. He took the action apart and laid its bones gently on a quilt. He showed them the jacks, the whippins, the flanges. He pressed dampers against strings, counted, and pronounced the instrument healthy for its age and history. He found only one oddity, and it was not mechanical. Tucked inside the case, caught between the soundboard and a brace, was a small envelope the color of tea. It had been there a long time. On the front, in Odile's hand. For the person who hears it, the room forgot how to breathe for a second. The piano tech handed the envelope to Barrett, who handed it to Nora, who looked at Caius and then at Officer Rhodes and said, "You better." Caius opened it. Inside, one page in a tight, old-fashioned script, "If you are reading this, you are listening," Odile had written. "If you are listening, you may hear what most houses forget to say out loud. I have taught many to count, I have taught some to sing. I have failed some and forgiven myself slowly. I left the piano because I could not bear the idea of it being lonely if I took it somewhere that did not know this air. If it plays when I am gone, let it. If it stops, let it rest. I have, in the middle of the night, heard keys move under my hands without me having asked them to. I have believed this was grief, and then believed it was kindness, and then believed it was just the way wood remembers being a tree. If you must name it, call it practice." The letter ended with a short list of pieces she loved at 3 in the morning and a small instruction in parentheses that was not, in fact, written with those marks, but with Odile's own delicate dashes. "Leave the north window a finger's width open when it is not raining. The instrument likes to hear the live oaks whisper." That night, clouds flew low, two hurried to stay. At 2:59, Caius propped the north window, only a sliver, just enough for the air to acknowledge the room. At 3, nothing. At 3:01, the first notes of the Goldberg variations rose and unbuttoned the dark. Savannah kept her manners. Crowds did not gather. People did not shout or film with the kind of greed that makes things smaller. They sat on stoops with mugs. They stood in hallways with their hands around their own wrists, the way people stand with themselves at wakes. The police came when called, then stayed uncalled. Barrett, the realtor, began to arrive too, not because it helped sell the house, but because he had not known a job could include being present for something that did not ask for money. On the 10th night, a woman in a green raincoat stopped on the front steps and did not come inside. She was in her 40s, hair cut short for hot weather, hands with a musician's map of callous and grace. When the piece ended, a Schubert impromptu that made the room softly astonished, she said, quietly, "Odile?" Mrs. Beaumont, hearing it, came in on Caius's arm and said the name, the way a friend says it when the friend is late on purpose. "Juniper Miles," she said, "piano class of 1997, the only student Odile ever called ferocious." Juniper smiled and made a face that admitted both pride and apology. "I left for Chicago and then for everywhere else. I did not come back when I should have. I am here now." She looked at the neighbor. "May I?" The house gathered itself. Juniper sat on the bench, didn't touch for a count of 5, then set her fingers where they had learned once to listen. She played something that did not need a name, the way warm water does not need a name when you have been cold too long. In the middle of the phrase, a note moved that she had not struck. It came into the chord like a clever friend inserting a joke. Juniper laughed under her breath, cheeks wet, and shifted. The instrument and the woman spoke for a while like people who had promised not to argue and then argued anyway and then remembered why they loved each other. It went on for 3 weeks. Not every night, not on demand. Sometimes the house slept. Sometimes the city rained too hard for even ghosts to be heard. Sometimes a siren ran its thin salt line down the block and the piano waited until the sound had passed. Once, in the middle of a storm that made the gutters spit, it played a lullaby Odile had composed for a boy named Manu in 1986 when his mother was sick and he kept falling asleep on the bench. Mrs. Beaumont recognized it and cried without bothering to hide it. The story found its small, polite way into the paper, 2 paragraphs on page 3, written by a local reporter who understood that fact and wonder are not enemies. The headline used the word mystery because that is the word that lets everyone keep their peace. No one mocked, no one tried to monetize. In a city that sells its own past by the scoop, that was a kind of miracle. On the last night, October arrived dressed as September's tired sister. The air cooled, the live oaks shook their sleeves. Caius woke at 2:40, not startled, just called. He walked across the street, unlocked the door with the realtor's blessing, and sat in the dark. He did not bring a thermos. He did not bring his pad. At 3, the piano did not start. At 3:03, either a 3:05. At 3:07, a tiny sound, not a key, not a pedal, cloth on wood. Juniper stepped into the parlor and took her place. She played the Lighthouse song from someone else's life, then Odil's favorite warm-up, then something Caius could not place that sounded like forgiveness given gently and not all at once. In the second page, a breeze from the north window touched the back of his neck, a key depressed that her fingers had not chosen. Juniper did not correct it. She smiled and let the note belong. When it ended, the city had the particular quiet of a decision. Juniper stood, laid her hand on the fallboard, and moved it down slowly until the keys were covered. She did not latch it. She turned to Caius and Nora and Rhodes and Mrs. Beaumont and Barrett and Mr. Patel and the handful of others who had become the kind of congregation that forms without a bulletin. She said, "There," and it sounded like a benediction. The piano did not play at 3 after that. Not the next night, not the next week, not in November when the air remembered how to be crisp, not in December when wreaths hung and college students went home and someone left a red scarf on the iron gate and no one took it because it looked like it belonged to the fence. The house stayed empty and not empty, listed and not for long, a property and a promise. In late January, a family bought it, a dental hygienist named Leora with a laugh that took the corners off bad news. Her husband, Arlo, who repaired old radios and believed sound should be coaxed and not forced. Their daughter, Elowen 6, who walked into the front parlor, saw the nabe, put both hands flat on its cheek, and said, "Hello," as if greeting a very old dog. Juniper came on a Saturday with a claw-footed lamp Odile had loved and set it by the window without being asked. Sometimes, walking home from the shop, Caius would slow by the gate. He would hear scales around dinner time, small fingers finding middle C, laughter at wrong notes, the stern patience of a mother counting. Once, later than practice, earlier than worry, he heard a phrase of Debussy float through the sliver of the north window and thought, not possessively, but with gratitude, you kept one thing the way it liked to be. Every now and then, at 3 in the morning, he would wake, because the body remembers the hour it learned to lean forward. He would listen. The city would give him what the city gives. A siren's shrug, a train's whisper, the far scrape of a palm frond on a gutter. He would not hear the piano. He would hear instead that quieter, deeper thing, a house that had been asked to keep a story and had kept it as long as it needed keeping, and then, with good manners and a bow, set it down. If you ever pass Jones Street near 3, look up. Someone might be washing a glass, someone might be turning a page. Someone might be dreaming a tune with their hands open on the covers. And in number 119, a girl might be asleep on the sofa with sheet music like a blanket, the north window left a finger's width open, the live oaks telling secrets in a language no one invented and everyone somehow understands. You could say nothing happened here. A vacant house made noise until it didn't. Keys moved and then they were still. Or you could say a small piece of the world did its best impression of grace and a few ordinary people showed up in time to hear it. Both things can be true. Both are enough. Wherever you are, whatever hour your own house favors, if you hear a song that has no source, let it finish, then wait one breath longer than you think you need. Sometimes, in that extra beat, you will feel the floor answer the air the way a body answers its name. And if you cannot name it, if the sensible part of you demands a mechanism, call it practice. Then stand in the doorway and be the kind of neighbor who listens. The babysitter heard a voice, don't answer the door. The first knock came at 8:53 on a rain-polished Saturday in late October, the kind of night in Portland, Oregon, when sidewalks shine and porches feel closer to the river. The house on Birch Hollow Court sat half a block from a small park that still carried the day's damp laughter. Inside, the dishwasher murmured, and a kettle tried to be brave. The babysitter stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, listening because something in the sound at the front of the house asked to be listened to. The knock was polite, then it wasn't. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Her name was Isola Marin, 19. Art student, commuter, weeknight sitter for families who liked the way she paid attention. She had a way of noticing and then not needing to say what she had noticed. Two children slept upstairs in rooms that smelled like clean cotton and a little of crayons. Oren, 5, a collector of sticks, and Juniper, 3, a thumbsucker who dreamed with her hands still resting on the bed rail as if the world might roll. Their parents, Elowin and Cormac Pike, had left at 7:15 for a long-promised dinner with friends on the east side. The year was 2016, when doorbells had learned to film you and phones hummed even when you wished them quiet. Isola had arrived early because she liked the first hour best when the house met you and you met it. The Pike's place had bones from the 1930s and confidence from a do-it-yourself remodel. A deep porch with a swing, pine floors that told the truth when the humidity rose, a narrow staircase that gave out a soft warning at the third tread. The front door had a knob smooth with history and a deadbolt that made a good, finished sound. Someone had left a bowl of apples on the kitchen island and a note in Elowin's looping hand, "Help yourself to anything except the chocolate chips." The note had a smile drawn like a quick breeze. There was also a line at the bottom that felt like it had been added while standing up. "If someone knocks and we're not back yet, don't answer." That line had made Isola breathe out through her nose, amused. Then the weather settled in, and the streetlight outside made the rain look like it had purpose, and she read the line again without amusement and put it into the pocket in her mind where she kept instructions that were probably not overcautious. The first knock came, then the doorbell. The chime had been replaced during the remodel and sounded like an idea of a doorbell rather than a doorbell itself. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola glanced at the hallway. The front camera should have sent her phone a picture, but her phone sat face down on the counter as an experiment in being a better person. She lifted it. No alert. No snapshot of a porch visitor wet with evening. She opened the app anyway. The screen showed a frozen image from 2 hours ago when the delivery driver in a yellow slicker had left a cardboard box and made a joke to the camera about swimming away. She touched the screen to wake it. It refused. The second knock came, not loud, but certain. She heard a hush behind the sound, no traffic for that moment, no neighbor's laugh, the rain taking a breath. "Coming!" she called, and heard the word bounce off the door and regret its volume. She crossed the living room, passing the lamp with the heavy base and the stack of picture books Elowin had left, lined up for bedtime like a plan that had already succeeded. She stopped 3 steps from the door, where you can still see the whole threshold and also the 3 framed photos on the wall to the right. Pike family on the Oregon coast, Pike family at a pumpkin patch, Pike family on a couch in this very room, elbows touching. The peephole showed dark. Not the dark of a coat, too close. The dark of rain pressuring the lens. She tilted her head to the side window, the one with the glass etched in a pattern of leaves. A shape stood on the porch, too close to see contours. Tall enough to be adult. Still, she thought of families who send a neighbor to drop off a sweater, of packages misdelivered, of jokes. She reached up, fingers on the deadbolt, and then the voice came from the stairwell behind her, even and close. A whisper and not a whisper, a way of speaking that used the room more than it used the air. "Don't answer the door." Isola stopped moving. The words had come from the landing, or the old heating vent in the hall, or the part of a house where stair and wall meet and decide to be patient. She turned her head, slow, like a deer deciding whether the sound belongs to a creek or to a person who has forgotten how feet work. No one stood there. Only the line of light from the kitchen, a run of framed children's drawings on the stair wall, and the slight turn of the banister at the top where a hand likes to pause. "Hello," she said, not loud, not questioning, simply acknowledging the world's habit of speaking up when you have one hand on a lock. Down the hall, the nightlight in Oren's room painted a small boat shape on the floor. She took her hand off the deadbolt. On the porch, the shape shifted its weight. The doorbell chimed again, 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola's phone remained stubbornly uninterested. She felt her scalp fizz, as if the body were sprinkling sugar there. She stepped back 1 foot, then another, until the space between her and the door felt like a sentence with the right number of commas. She set the phone on the entry table and kept her eyes on the door. The shape did not knock again. "Can I help you?" she called, calm. "The owners aren't home." The shape made no answer. The rain decided to be louder for a few seconds, then took its apology and softened. A car passed at the end of the block, and its tires whispered on wet asphalt, then left them again. The shape did not say, "Leave this," or "I'm lost," or "Wrong address." It did not step down the stairs or shift toward the window to try a too close look. It stood. The voice from the stairs came again, almost the same, the almost important. "Don't answer ISO." No one called her ISO except two people who were not in this house. Not even Elowen, who preferred full names like a teacher who still missed a chalkboard. The nickname arrived and held. The quiet around it learned how to be heavier. Isola is not the kind of person who does brave for style. She does careful as choreography. She picked up the heavy flashlight from the umbrella stand and felt the weight in her fingers like a vote. She walked backward into the living room, never turning her back to the door until the couch was behind her knees. Then she set the flashlight on its end on the coffee table, ready to throw its beam like a purposeful animal. She tapped the phone awake. Now the camera app sent an alert, but when she opened it, the image from the porch was empty but for rain. A rain curtain, the edge of the porch railing. No shape, no wet footprints on the mat when she zoomed, though that could be the grain of the old wood lining. The house held itself very still. Oren coughed once upstairs and rolled to a new dream. The dishwasher hit its dry cycle and made a small whir, as if about to tell a joke. Isola stood. She walked to the staircase and put her hand on the newel post because sometimes wood is better than a person's breath. She stepped up the first 3 treads, the third giving its soft warning, and peered down the hall. Juniper's door was open, just enough for night to move through. Oren's was open a little wider because he had insisted, recently, that he could hear better if the door learned to be brave, and no one had argued with the logic. "Thank you," she said to the landing. She felt ridiculous. She felt correct. The phone hummed. A text from Cormac, "Running late, dessert took forever." "You good?" She typed, "Yes." All quiet. Then after a second, a person knocked. Didn't answer. "All good." He bubbled back a thumbs up and a "let me know if weird." She did not type the lines she could not yet shape. She put the phone in her back pocket and went to the kitchen kettle. Tea might give the house another language to speak in. At 9:11, the sound came again. Not the knock. The dry slide of weight on porch boards, then a new voice, not in the room and not in the rain. A man's voice on the other side of the door, pitched to be reassuring and succeeding halfway. "Hey there," it called. "Sorry to bug you. My car slid a bit. I'm fine, just could I borrow a phone charger? Mine died." Isola stood very still on the tile by the stove. Charged phones. The sentence wore a coat of sense. It also wore the same coat a story uses when it wants to be invited inside. She felt the stair voice rest itself like a hand just between her shoulders. "Don't answer." "I can call a tow from here," she said. "If you tell me your name and plate, I'll call it in." A beat. The rain breathed. A neighbor's porch light clicked on 2 doors down, as if someone there had a similar feeling that night, should know it was being watched. "Sure," the voice said, cheerful, hurried. "Yeah, okay, appreciate it. I'm Kai. Plate is Washington, ZNJ." He trailed. The sound changed as if he had turned his head, as if reading something off a thing that had decided not to help him. "Hold up. Hard to see in the rain." "Okay," Isola said. She took a pen from the junk drawer. She did not step toward the door. The voice did not finish. The porch boards did the shift sound again, the one a body makes when deciding to step down, then silence, which is a choice. She waited a full minute and then padded back to the front hall, one foot making no more sound than the idea of a foot. Through the etched glass, she could see only the suggestion of a person-shaped absence where rain fell differently. The porch swing moved a breath back and forth, though she had not seen it move before tonight. She put her ear near the wood and did that thing you do against doors you don't mean to open. She listened to the hinge. She heard air. She did not hear breathing. She backed away because she did not owe the door any of the parts of her face. At 9:27, the voice from the stairs came a third time, and now it had a softness that made her throat ache. Don't answer the door, Isola. Okay, she said, and laughed once, not unkind. Okay. She called the non-emergency line. The operator's voice was brisk, then kinder when she heard the children's ages. They sent a patrol car to cruise Birch Hollow Court. The officer rolled slow under the maples, touched two fingers to his brim up toward the windows like old practice, then slid away toward the park. He called to tell her he'd found no car in distress, no one walking in rain. She thanked him the way a person thanks another for being willing to be seen doing their job. At 10:09, something touched the back door. Not a knock, the whisper sound of a finger on glass. Isola turned off the kitchen light and let the room become a place where her eyes could do their best work. She stood behind the island and let one breath out, as if teaching her ribs a rule. The finger on glass again. Scrape, gentle. A child in some houses might do that, playing ambush. But the child would laugh or give himself away with breath fogging the pain in a haunted oval. The voice in the hall didn't speak. It didn't need to. Isola aimed the flashlight at the floorboards and thumbed it on. The beam carved a clean white lane across the tile and into the mudroom, up onto the window, where a skin of condensation wavered on the glass like a thought. No face waited beyond it, only the moon in its nearly new mood, and the reflection of her own shoulder shaping into something braver than she felt. The scrape came again. The flashlight beam caught the faintest arc at the level of a hand. She walked a half step closer and saw what had made it. On the outside of the glass, pressed lightly against the pane as if placed, and then hesitated and then not taken away, was a leaf. A maple leaf quilted with rain, stem hanging like a punctuation mark. It trembled and dragged and lifted free. That was all. By 10:45, the children were deep in the kind of sleep that makes a house feel like it has set down a heavy bag. Isola sat in the living room and read 3 pages of a book without hearing a word, then closed it and looked at the door again and felt foolish again for looking at a door. She texted Elowen, "No rush, all fine." Their reply came in a minute. "On our way, rain slow, be home around 11:15, and wore the sound of people who have begun putting coats on." At 11:19, as headlights turned the corner outside and rain slicked away from tires and the familiar shape of the Pikes' wagon slowed by the curb, the doorbell chimed a third time. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola stood in the hallway, hand on the deadbolt, and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty, the wagon door closed. Cormac ran up the steps in a coat wet enough to laugh at itself. He patted his pockets like a magician who had dropped something essential. He had not rung. The bell had decided to make a ceremony for him anyway. Elowen kissed Isola's cheek in the open doorway and apologized to the night for taking their time. Cormac did a father's walk down the hall to glance into his children's rooms, even though he had been told they were sleeping. Isola told them the short version. A knock, a voice asking for a charger, a patrol car that had been kind. The line on their note she had obeyed in a way that made the marrow in her wrist feel hot. Elowen's mouth went still. Not hard, still. She looked toward the stairs, like a person checking if water had been left running in an upstairs bathroom. "Thank you," she said. "I should have told you more about that line on the note. It felt like telling too much would make it silly, but I should have told you." "I heard a voice," Isola said, careful as she said it, ready to be believed, ready to be joked with. "From the landing. It told me not to answer. It knew my name." Elowen closed her eyes and nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They made tea. Cormac sat on the arm of a chair like a man who cannot bend himself small enough to fit back into an ordinary evening. Elowen told the story the way you tell one when you have lived with it long enough to know where its corners are. 2 winters before, she said, on a night when the river lifted itself and tried on a deeper voice, a man had walked the neighborhood knocking on doors asking for help. When people opened, he asked to come in and make a call, and if they stepped aside, he would cross the threshold with a speed that felt like another person had told him to hurry. Police had found him at the park pavilion where he had been sleeping rough, talking to a friend only he could hear. He never hurt anyone, Elowen said, but the nights after that, felt like a door with a hard-to-find key. 2 weeks later, Cormac said, picking up the part he needed to say, "We were here with a sitter, not you, a college kid named Pike, no relation, and something similar happened." Knock. Voice. He started toward the door, and Juniper, who was barely 2, sat up and said clear as a broadcast, "Don't answer, Daddy." She was barely speaking in sentences. She said it right. My mother's voice used to say it to me when I would go to the door for anybody. Something about the way Junie said it, it sounded like my mother and not like my daughter, and also like my daughter anyway. I didn't open the door. We watched through the side glass. There was nobody there. The bell chimed again. And then, Elowen added, last spring, when we were packing for a visit to my sister's, the doorbell chimed at 2:17 in the morning. Twice. Cormac checked. No one. Junie sat up and said it again. Don't answer the door. We changed the batteries in the chime. We changed the camera. We got smarter about being dumb. But the voice, it comes when it needs to. And she sleeps through it now. We hear it and we listen to it, and then we don't tell anyone because the world doesn't know what to do with a family in a sentence. They laughed softly, a release. The kettle sighed. Rain found a new tempo along the gutters. Isola told them about the man who had used the name Kai and about the way the shape had filled the porch and then been only Rain when she asked questions. She said the nickname the voice had used for her and watched Elowen's face widen in a slow astonishment that contained no fear. It knows, Elowen said. It knows who it needs to keep. They did not turn the story into an advertisement for another religion. They put the house back in order. Isola took the extra bills Cormac offered only after he insisted 3 times. She put on her jacket, damp from fear she didn't call fear, and stepped out onto the porch with them. The porch looked like any porch. The swing creaked because swings are built to do that, at least a little. The streetlight watched their car for a second, then got bored. Elowen reached for Isola's hand and squeezed, once, like a benediction you don't have to keep. On the drive home, the wipers kept time for a song Isola wouldn't have recognized if it had been played for her on a better night. She went under the overpass, where a man with a shopping cart had built a small palace of pallets and hope. She went by the open all-night grocery, where the cashier sells soup to people whose apartments never learned to hold heat. She went by a block of houses where the windows showed families still awake and not sorry. At a red light, she lowered her window and let the rain reach all the way in and touch her cheek, and then she rolled it back up and laughed, because the world had not insisted on being only one thing. The voice didn't follow her. It stayed with the house that needed it. Weeks went by without another knock at an odd hour. Leaves went to ground, and then to bags, and then to wherever leaves go when they've done their first job. On a Thursday in early December, Isola sat for another family across town and saw, on the neighborhood chat, a thread begin. Did anyone hear a bell twice last night around 2? The comments were predictable, then less so. A woman 4 streets over wrote that her grandmother used to leave a ribbon on the inside doorknob to remind herself not to open for kindness in the exact hour when kindness is most dangerous. A man who taught band at the high school wrote that he lived alone and still heard a voice sometimes when he put his hand on the deadbolt, and it always sounded like a person who had spent the afternoon organizing drawers and would simply not have the mess of a poor decision. Near midnight, her phone hummed. A text from Elowen, a photo of Juniper asleep on the couch under a quilt, toes poking out like arguments. Under it, a simple line. When she was half asleep tonight, she said, "Tell ISO thanks. The thanks is from me too." That winter, the door stayed a door. Spring arrived with a rhythm it was proud of. The voice came twice, each time for Isola, once at the Pike house, and once oddly in a different house where the rule felt the same though the picture frames were new. Don't answer. Each time she didn't. Each time the world failed to end. Each time she thought of how many doors in this country stand between people who need help and people who will offer it, and people who mean harm and the harm they intend. She learned something small and, to her, permanent. Safety and kindness are not enemies. They are a ladder. You step to the next rung when it will hold, not before. In late summer, after her semester ended and before the new one began, She took a train to see family in Eastern Washington. In the dining car, a man waved her to the empty seat across from him, the way travelers do when their stories want company, and she accepted. He was older, but not old, wore a ball cap with the logo torn off, and had one of those faces that make you feel remembered. He asked what she did. She said art and children and listening. He nodded as if that were a single profession. He told her he had been a night manager at a motel once, decades back, and how sometimes the night tells you who to open the door for and who to speak to through glass, and how your body knows if you let it be the first expert. He said his mother's voice still visited clear, not spooky, not the kind of thing you put in a movie, and told him the one sentence that she had left him as a tool: don't answer the door, not because you aren't good, because you are. She returned to Portland with a sketchbook full of stairways and kettles and porch swings. She babysat for the Pikes the first Friday of October, a night with dry leaves and a moon that put on a mustache of cloud and then laughed at itself. The bedtimes went easy. The dishwasher hummed. At 9:14, the bell chimed once and stopped. She walked to the door and put her hand on the newel post and waited. The voice did not come this time. The house trusted her to have learned. She didn't answer. Later, when Elowen got home and leaned against the door while she took her boots off and said, "I love my boots and I love taking them off," Isola told her about the single chime. Elowen laughed softly and asked if she wanted pie, and they ate pie in the kitchen with their spoons, making small civilized noises, and the night minding its business. If you want a moral, there isn't one sharp and neat enough to slice bread. There is a sentence that belongs to a particular house on Birch Hollow Court, and maybe to your house too if you need it. Don't answer the door. It doesn't mean never. It doesn't mean be a city made of fear. It means listen for the moment your body tells you the story the night is trying to sell, then say no with enough steadiness that the night has to take its pitch elsewhere. If you are ever in a quiet house with children sleeping like small planets upstairs, and the door learns a new trick with its hinge at a time of night when even helpful people forget how to stand, and you hear a voice that knows your name and the shape of your life, let it be a chain on the inside, not a chain on the world. Make tea. Call for help you trust. Stay in the room with the light. Thank the air when it warns you, even if the thanks feels ridiculous in your mouth. Names will still be names in the morning, doors will still be doors. And you will have kept the lesson the old houses know. Sometimes the kindest act is to hold still while the night tries your latch and finds it true. The dorm room that kept getting warmer every night. The first night she noticed it, the heat felt like a mistake rather than a message. Early September in Ohio, a Sunday that leaned into Monday, the kind of campus night when cicadas buzz like old streetlights and the dorm's brick walls hold the afternoon sun just long enough to be nostalgic. Isolde Marin unrolled a thrifted rug that smelled faintly of cedar, set two plants on the windowsill like green punctuation, and lay back on the narrow bed under the hum of a fan that tried hard and failed. Sutter Hall, room 412, fourth floor, end of the hall. The radiator beneath the window ticked its polite little ticks. Her phone read 78 inside, while the weather app swore 68 outside. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2018. Move-in had been a week of book stacks, cardboard cuts, and names learned in bursts that evaporated by dinner. Isolde's major was urban studies with a minor in printmaking because maps and ink made sense even when people did not. Her roommate, a sophomore transfer named Mairead Klein, arrived with a battered cello case and the posture of someone who had done 3 summers of lifeguarding and was still listening for whistles. Their RA, Bram Delaney, wore a lanyard like a badge and kindness like a habit. The floor smelled like laundry pods and slice and bake cookies. The building smelled like every Midwestern dorm built in the 1970s, a blend of cinder block, old varnish, and the ghost of burnt popcorn. That first night, Isolde pushed the window up 2 inches. The sash stuck, then relented with a groan that sounded like the word careful. She fell asleep to a parking lot lullaby and woke at 2:19 with her neck damp. The fan had not changed. The room had. The little thermometer clipped to her backpack strap said 81. She turned the fan higher. The blades shouted their small capacity. She kicked the blanket down and slept again like a person auditioning for rest. Monday, the heat drifted earlier, 10:47. A wave across her ankles first, then knees, then a slow embrace that felt like a crowded bus in July. She checked the radiator, cold metal. She put her palm on the cinder block, on the window glass, on the closet door. Nothing from those shapes admitted guilt. Mairead returned from orchestra and set the cello gently on the desk chair. She stood still, chin tilted, the way musicians listen to rooms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "It keeps getting warmer after midnight," Isolde said. "The building probably overcorrects, day cools down, system lags, night gets weird." Mairead nodded. "I fell asleep during rehearsal last winter in a practice room. Woke drenched. Found out the steam had backfed into a silent radiator. You could hear it in the walls if you pressed your ear." They both pressed their ears to the dorm wall. The cinder block offered a polite shush, the way libraries used to. No steam, no hiss, just the slow drum of a building's heart. By Wednesday, the room was a decision the night kept making. 83 by 1 a.m., 85 by 3. Isolde checked the hallway, cool enough to be a relief. She checked the stairwell, cooler still. In the common room, a girl wearing a sweatshirt that said "Ecology means everything" had her feet tucked under her and a textbook open like a tent. She looked up. "Your floor hot too." "Only ours," Isolde said. "Or only me. Or only when I try to sleep." They laughed because college teaches you to treat weirdness like weather. You comment, you adapt, you set one more fan on the windowsill and call it a life. Thursday brought a storm that argued with the city for hours. A late summer brawl of heat and lightning. The power hiccuped and then recovered. The building hummed. At 2 a.m., the room hung heavy. Isolde slid out of bed, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the screen, as if the night owed her an apology. Far below, a maintenance cart whispered along the service road. She saw the driver's hat and his careful hands. She did not see the face. She told herself the heat felt personal only because you cannot argue with a building and win. By Saturday, the temperature games had found a schedule. 9:58, a nudge. 11:30, a hand on the small of the back. 1:12, the sensation of standing too close to an open oven. Isolde began to time her showers like a boxer timing breath. She tried sleeping on the cool tile of the little bathroom. She tried damp cloths on wrists and ankles. She tried a sliver of ice in a hand towel held to her throat. She tried pretending it was fine. She told no one at home because her mother would only worry and send articles about heat stroke, and her father would suggest a hardware store trip that distance made irrelevant. Sunday night, Mairead woke first. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, said a word that sounded like, "What is this?" and went to the window. The sash had dropped the last inch by itself at some point in the night, closing with that old house suction that makes a soft kiss. She lifted it again, hot air breathed in, not outdoor hot. Not the honest humidity of a Midwest night, different, like the air that escapes when you open a dryer in a laundromat and forget to step back. "We call maintenance in the morning," Mairead said. "We tell them we have an invisible sauna. We use likable voices and the phrase safety concern." Monday morning, Bram came with a clipboard and his likable voice. He listened earnestly, took the temperature with a cheap tool that blinked numbers nobody trusted, wrote down 86, and then underlined it as if underlining were a wrench. He called facilities. They promised someone by afternoon. The someone arrived at 4:19, late enough to be human, early enough to look like hope. His name, patch read, Gentry. He was the kind of person who stands in a room like it has a puzzle only he can solve, and then smiles when the puzzle turns out to be harder. He checked the radiator, the thermostat no one had noticed in the corner with its tiny slider, the vent slits high near the ceiling that made the room look like it could breathe if it wanted to. "Steam off," he said. "Air handler off. You got a ghost heater." He grinned to make sure they understood he meant the phrase and not the ghost. But he knocked on the radiator anyway, knuckles to iron, the way some people knock on wood when they do not believe in luck and practice it just in case. He opened the closet and frowned. "Do you mind?" he asked, and shifted their shoes to one side. Behind the shoe rack, a square of plywood patched a hole in the wall. Screws, paint over paint. He crouched, fit a screwdriver into a head, and worked it loose. When the panel came away, a breath of air came with it. Warm. The kind of warm air that has been waiting its turn. "Old Chase," he said. "Big one. They used to run steam risers along these shafts in the 70s. Maybe a repair, maybe somebody capped something and forgot to ask the night to forgive them." He put his hand into the dark space and paused. He was not afraid. He was listening. Hear that. They leaned closer. At first, only quiet, then a small sound. Not a hiss, not a vapor whisper. A tick. Regular, patient. Like a metronome a long room away. Gentry nodded. Thermal something. Or a tenant below you added a pet space heater that thinks it owns the building. "I'll trace the chase. I'll talk to the engineers." He put the panel back gently and made a note on his worksheet with a pencil that had been sharpened to the earnest point of a person who still respects graphite. "I will try to fix the physics. In the meantime, get a bigger fan." He winked to soften the fact that bigger fans often just make bigger noise. They bought another fan anyway. They bought clips to hold the window higher. They bought ice in the deli and wrapped it in a towel like a patient. Still, Knight insisted. Isolde began keeping a notebook. It was a habit from a summer job shelving returns. Titles, times, temperatures. Notes that sounded like weather reports written by a poet with a bad sense of humor. The dorm ate the cool at 118. The bed felt like a cast iron pan that had forgotten it was retired. I dreamed of a field on fire with no flame. She started staying up with the heat to see if it would reveal its reason. She did readings in the hall where the air felt borderline normal. She ate popsicles and pretended it was study fuel. She took walks at 2 and saw the campus under its other mask. A place of slow bikes and glowing vending machines, and a custodian humming while polishing a floor into a lake. Once she saw Gentry in the stairwell, descending from 5 with a coil of flexible duct over his shoulder like a silver python that had agreed to be helpful. He nodded and lifted one hand without letting the duct slip. "Sleep," he said in the tone of a wish. By the 3rd week, a rumor floated into their floor group chat. Sutter Hall used to be a summer dorm for high school programs and band camps. The heat was leftover rehearsal energy. Someone else wrote that an electrical fire in 1979 had bruised the 4th floor and the building was still shy about it. A person named Quillen in 409 posted a link to an archive student newspaper with a grainy photo of firefighters carrying a hose through a stairwell that looked exactly like theirs. Headline: Minor fire, major evacuation, no injuries, cause unknown. Masquerade, who believed in research the way some people believe in saint candles, went to the library's basement where old newsprint lives. She returned with photocopies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The story was sparse. Smoke at 303, alarms, students in bathrobes on the lawn, the heat source somewhere inside a wall where a maintenance chase ran, repairs by October, reopening with new paint and the same old radiators. She spread the pages on the desk like cards. "There," she said softly, pointing to a little box at the margin. "Letter to the editor. Student writes that the heat on 4 was getting worse each night before the fire. RA told them to open windows and hydrate. Facilities said everything within normal range. The days were normal. The nights turned the rooms into ovens." Isolde looked from the paper to the cinder block. Sometimes a run of text looks like a hallway and you want to walk down it with a flashlight. She hit the building's history page on the university site. Donors. Dedications. A black and white photo of a ribbon. Nothing about the night warmth that arrived like someone else's breath. At 1:27, the room grew heavy again. As if their research had rung a bell the building had been waiting to hear. The fan jammed the window open, but the heat came anyway. The little thermometer blinked 88 and then surrendered to the idea that numbers, like sleep, sometimes lose track of themselves. Isolde slept badly and woke with a headache that tasted like pennies. On her desk, the notebook sat open to an entry she did not remember writing. The letters were tidy, her handwriting when she tried to look like someone else. She read the line twice, then 3 times. It said, "Open the panel," and the period at the end looked like a door. She waited until afternoon. Gentry had promised to come back sometime, and sometime often arrives when a person steps away for 5 minutes. At 4 o'clock, with the building's light turned down to that late summer amber, she moved the shoe rack again and unscrewed the panel. The dark behind it was not night, exactly. More like the idea of a hallway after the last person has left and turned the lights off out of habit. She lifted her phone flashlight and aimed it into the chase. Dust motes performed private theater. A vertical shaft, maybe 2 feet across, ran up and down like a secret elevator. Patches where pipes had once been. Scars where brackets had caught things. And there, almost directly under the bottom edge of the opening, a flat ledge of old wood with something resting on it. Isolde reached in with care, as if the dark could be brittle. Her fingers found the object's corner. Cardboard. The top felt soft, the way paper does when it has been damp and then forced to pretend it never was. She drew it out. A small box that had once been white and now had become a kind of museum beige. On the lid, written in a hand that pressed too light, a word like a name, Juniper. She set the box on the rug and did not open it. She waited, and the waiting gave her permission to continue. Inside, a stack of index cards tied with string, a folded note, a key on a blue ribbon, narrow as a promise. The note began with, "Dear whoever found this," and continued with the kind of sentences people write when they have been waiting to tell something to a person who will understand. The year at the top of the page read 1979. The signature at the bottom read, Juniper Vale, Room 4, 16, Sutter Hall. The handwriting leaned to the right, steady as a person who prefers walking to running. "I do not know if I will be believed," it said. "So I am writing this as plainly as I can. Our room is getting warmer each night. The thermometer in our snake plant reads 87 at 3 in the morning. Nobody believes a snake plant. My roommate thinks I am being dramatic. I asked the RA. He said it is just late summer in Ohio. It is not. The heat comes after midnight. It leaves at dawn. The radiator is cold. The vent does not blow. The closet smells like hot iron. I hear ticking in the wall. We are on 4. If you are reading this, maybe you have it too." Isolde felt her own breath echo back from the paragraph. She looked up at the closet door, then at the open chase, as if the words might have leaked. Juniper's note went on, "I work at the cafeteria breakfast shift. I am awake when others are asleep. The heat is a person to me now. It arrives at a time, it stays, it goes. I tried to leave the window open and the sash slid down. I propped it with a book, the book fell, then the window closed by itself. I am not saying a ghost. I am saying something else has a habit here. In case this is useful to you, I am also leaving these. Inside the library's bound journals, someone wrote about a fire on this floor long ago, and then someone else took the page out. I copied what I could before they did. The key is to a storage cabinet in the basement of this building. There are boxes there the staff say are theirs. The key works for the green cabinet that has a dent like a fist. I did not take anything because I got scared. Maybe you will not be. If no one else believes you, I do. I believe you enough to hide this where the building keeps its secrets. If I am wrong, throw this away. If I am right, find what the staff do not talk about. Do not forget to sleep. That is where your spine remembers its job. Masquerade came in from rehearsal and stopped when she saw the open panel, the box, the pages laid like a small altar. She sank to the floor and read with both hands pressed flat against the rug as if to steady the words. "We have to find the cabinet," she said, voice quiet like church. "We have to ask Bram to not ask questions." Bram did ask questions because that is also the RA's job. When he saw the note and the box and the panel, he bent his head. He was not a superstitious person, only a person who had worked 3 summers as a camp counselor and learned that buildings hold mood the way lakes hold wind. "I can get you into the basement," he said. "I will walk away from the door and hum loudly so that if anyone asks me what I was doing, I can say I was humming. You will be fast." The basement under Sutter was everything a basement should be. Cool as forgiveness, damp as a memory kept by concrete. The hall shone a soft yellow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Green cabinets lined one wall. The third from the end had a dent like a fist. The key ribbon was blue. The lock turned. Inside, cardboard boxes labeled with dates and short phrases. Stack of work orders, steam archive, fire log, staff do not remove. The handwriting on the labels was neat and stern. Mairead reached up and slid one down. The bottom sagged ominously. They set it on the floor. Inside, manila folders swollen with damp and years. Isolde opened one and pulled a sheet carefully so it would not split. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 416. Unusual heat after midnight. Radiator cold. Closet warm. Check chase, check riser. She set it aside and pulled another. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 412. Student reports late heat, not present daytime. Housekeeping notes window sash malfunctioning. Recommend maintenance weld stop. Isolde looked up. Weld stop. She imagined a person 40 years earlier thinking a sliding sash a nuisance and telling someone to make it tame. Another folder. Fire log, September. Smell of hot iron. Call at 3-3. Response within 3 minutes. Source uncertain. Damage limited to inside of chase between 412 and 416. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: cap steam riser permanently at basement and roof. Service ticket created. The paper clipped to the recommendation was a receipt for parts and a penciled note reading, done. A second note added another sentence in a different hand. Night crew reports residual heat persists. Monitor. Mairead pressed her palm over her own heart. This is the story of every building that tries to forget. The parts get fixed, the habit stays. They took photos with their phones like archivists on a deadline. They replaced the folders in the box with the care of people dressing a child who was finally asleep. They locked the cabinet. Bram hummed. The hallway air kept its cool. Back upstairs, they sat with the panel open and the note on the rug, and the cooling afternoon creeping through the window like a kind visitor. Isolde's notebook waited with its white page. She wrote, Juniper, thank you. She did not know where to put the sentence, so she put it on the first line under the date so it would be the thing the day had to carry. At 1:28, the heat returned. It did not surge. It arrived politely, like a person who has been taught to knock. Isolde sat on the floor beside the open chase and placed her hand just inside without touching any side. The air felt warmer than the room, as if the chase were a throat exhaling a breath it had saved. What do you want? She said aloud, not because she thought the building would answer, but because sometimes the voice knows which door truth stands behind. The tick came again, regular, small. Isolde counted between ticks. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. The rhythm made a shape in her mind, not a clock, a valve. A thing that opens and then holds. A thing that believes in intervals. She looked at the radiator. At the elbow joint where the old pipe met the shutoff wheel, a tiny telltale stain had crept along the seam, brown and precise. She leaned closer. Warm, not hot. Warm like a wrist. Gentry returned the next day with a partner whose name patch read Tova. They listened, as technicians do when the room is allowed to make its case. Isolde showed them the cabinet photos. Tova's lips kept a straight line while her eyebrows confessed their feelings. They pulled the panel and shone better light. They found the old riser, capped, cool. They found a newer run of conduit laid up the side at some later date, carrying wires, not heat. They found insulation collapsed onto itself like old cake. They found nothing that pointed to a flame or a hiss. Tova ran a thermal camera along the cinder block. The screen glowed in false color. A vertical stripe warmer than its neighbors lay behind the closet and the head of the bed. Not red, not danger, yellow shading into orange. Residual, Gentry said, could be heat migrating from a lower source, could be a hot water loop bringing showers to the floor below with more enthusiasm than planned. But the loop below doesn't run at 3 in the morning, Tova said. She had the nap schedule of the building memorized. She pointed to the thermal stripe. This is a habit. They scheduled a shutdown for the following night, midnight to 4. The building would sigh and then sleep while they opened valves and listened for the kind of silence that tells the truth. Bram knocked on doors and posted signs. The girls in Ecology Means Everything, Sweats, groaned about showers and then agreed. The 4th floor exhaled in a collective okay. At 12:12, the pumps slowed. The fan in 412 made its small, brave wind. The window held at 3 inches with 2 clips like a pair of loyal hands. At 1:27, the room still warmed. Not as high, not as fast, but enough to say, I am here. Isolde sat on the rug and pressed her shoulder to the closet wall. She closed her eyes so hearing could be her only job. She heard the tick, she heard Myreed's breath even. She heard, outside, a late skateboard roll between classes like a drum. And she heard, very faint and not from the chase at all, a tone. Not a pipe, not a fan, not foreseeable. A note, caught and held. Then gone. She opened her eyes. Mairead was looking at her with a musician's gaze. You heard it too. What is it? Isolde asked. A harmonic. The kind you get when a sympathetic thing vibrates because its friend is nearby. She touched the cello case. Instruments do it, rooms do it, bodies do it when they are convinced. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, lifted a glass of water, and set it on the radiator. The surface quivered. A ripple. A second one. The pattern of the tick. Mairead tuned by memory and sang a single low pitch, almost under her breath. A hum that could have been mistaken for a thought. The glass shivered. The tick in the wall danced out of step, then found her beat, then stilled as if listening, then returned. What if, she said quietly, all this is sound pretending to be heat? Isolde did not laugh. She had learned the month prior that grief can pretend to be a quiz grade and hunger can pretend to be impatience. Why not sound pretending to be heat? She ran her palm along the cinder block, then placed it flat and left it. A warmth answered. The next day was October 1st. Campus wore flannel and pretended it had always loved cinnamon. Facilities sent an email with the subject line Steam Update that promised further investigation and patience. The fourth floor shared a thread of remedies and rituals. Bowls of ice, mist bottles, wet socks trick, floor naps. No one suggested sage. Someone suggested prayer with a grin that did not deny its usefulness. That night, the heat arrived like a smaller animal. 81, 82, a steady hold at 83. Manageable if you learned how. Isolde placed the glass on the radiator again, turned off the fans, and waited for quiet to settle where it belongs. Mairead sang once, twice, and stopped. The glass's ripples slowed. The tick shifted to the far side of the closet. A draft found her ankles like a cat checking for attention. The room listened back. They made it through October with methods that would have looked ridiculous out of context and were ordinary inside it. They slept with wet towels folded like scarves. They studied in the hall and accepted that their room had been reclassified as a place you prepared to enter rather than a place you lived. They kept the panel off. They learned to say thank you to cool mornings and to say aloud the promise to return before night put its hand on the doorknob. One evening, after a storm blew leaves against the window like letters trying to enter, Bram knocked and leaned in. Facilities found something, he said. You want to come see? The invitation sounded like a friend offering to show you where a magic trick hides its thread. In the basement, Tova stood beside the building's old heart, piping like veins, valves like knuckles, tags tied with string, naming parts from an era that believed names mattered. She pointed to a run that disappeared into the wall beneath, where 412 would stand above them. Here, a capped branch, not steam, an old electrical conduit bypassed years ago. It sits next to a hot water loop. When the loop runs heavy during evening showers, it warms the conduit and then the chase. The chase carries that warmth upward. At night, when the loop cycles to keep the building from feeling abandoned, the warmth lingers. The panel in your closet became the mouth of it. A small chimney with no smoke. Gentry tapped the conduit with his knuckle. You could call it physics, you could also call it habit. Either is the right answer. They installed insulation around the conduit. They added an air brake in the chase so warmth would stop treating the wall like a ladder. They replaced the window's stiff cords so the sash would consent to stay where a human asked it to stay. They promised it would help. They did not promise everything. It helped. The nights cooled to numbers that looked like decimals instead of pronouncements. 77. 76 when the wind took an interest. Isolde slept without wet towels. She still woke at 1:27 once, for no reason except the body's loyalty to former alarms. She lay there and listened. The room made its old house noises. Outside, snow rehearsed far away and then gave up. She fell asleep, mouthing the word juniper the way a person mouths the name of a bus stop, to remember where to get off next time. November brought a letter, real paper, wiggle of ink, the return address for a dorm across campus, Reed Hall. Inside, 2 sentences in a tidy hand. I found your note in the basement box when Bram fetched more tape for door decorations. My aunt's name was Juniper Vale. She lived in Sutter in 1979. I have a photo of her in front of a radiator holding a cup of tea and laughing like the tea was a joke. Thank you for believing her. Signed, Quillen Vale, room 305. Isolde wrote back. She wrote about the cabinet and the boxes and the way the building had tried to forget. Quillen wrote again with a copy of the photo. Juniper looked like someone who would hide a note and trust the future. Hair gathered in a bandana, eyes practicing mischief. The radiator behind her, upright as a soldier that had decided to sit. Finals arrived like weather that had been announced for weeks and still surprised everyone. Masquerade spent long hours in the practice rooms, bow rising and falling like a small boat riding out a swell. Isolde finished a printmaking project of 14 little maps of Sutter Hall. She gave the stairwells names. She drew the 4th floor twice, once by day, once by night. She printed in blue and rust. She added a tiny red dot where their closet panel sat like a secret door. She titled the piece, Heat Rises, Then Cool Heads. On the last night before winter break, they propped the door open and played a playlist of songs that sounded like leaving without saying goodbye. Their neighbors drifted in. Cups of cocoa. A plate of cookies that looked store-bought and tasted like grief in the shape of sugar. Someone told a story about a chessboard left in a laundry room that always had one piece moved between midnight and dawn. Someone else told a story about a campus fountain that ran warm all winter like a stubborn rumor. They laughed easily because relief had come. Before midnight, Bram stood in the doorway with his clipboard and a tired smile and said, "Thank you for not setting anything on fire this semester," which is a low bar that feels high after October. Isolde slept early and woke with the feeling of being watched in a kind way. She rolled over and looked at the open panel. The chase breathed a soft, neutral air. She whispered the habit of her thanks the way some people say grace. For the cool, for the note, for the way buildings hold hands with the people who listen. In January, when the term began again and the air cut like paper, the room behaved. The radiator learned its job when asked. The night stopped bringing heat like a dare. The panel stayed off anyway. They left it open not because they liked the view of a dark shaft, but because some doors, once discovered, should not be forced to forget they can open. One night in late February, when snow made a tidy line along the windowsill and the hall smelled like wool and wet boots, Masquerade tuned and held a low note the way a person can hold a breath when they want the person across from them to finish their thought. The glass on the radiator did not ripple, the tick did not come. She let the note go, she smiled. Habit broken, she said, and then added, or perhaps trained. Spring came in fits of joy and apology. Sutter Hall turned quiet, then loud, then quiet again. Finals chalked the sidewalks with equations and wishes. On the last afternoon before move-out, Gentry and Tova came by with a work order that did not need signatures. "We are capping the chase permanently," Tova said. "Not the kind of permanent that forgets. The kind that leaves a note for the next person." Gentry nodded at the open panel. "Leave it if you want, we're not offended." He tapped the cinder block once with his knuckle and said, "Thanks for telling us. We need buildings to snitch on us. Otherwise, we fix the wrong things." They closed their boxes. They took the plants off the sill. They rolled the rug into a new shape. Bram signed their checkout forms with a flourish. In the hall, Isolde taped one last paper to the wall at eye level between 412 and 416. Not a manifesto, not a myth, a map. She had printed 2 copies. The little red dot, the words, "If your room gets warmer every night, you are not dramatic and you are not alone." The panel in the closet is held by 4 screws. Please listen for the tick. Please go to the basement cabinet with the green dent. And please, sleep. Your spine remembers its job when you do. She signed it tiny, just initials, because the story did not belong to her alone. Years later, when she would sleep in cities with windows that sealed shut and air that arrived by command, she would sometimes wake at 1:27 and rest her palm against the wall. Habit, memory, a check-in with the building around her. She would feel the honest cool of drywall. She would hear the thrum of someone's TV 3 floors down, or a neighbor's late laugh, and think, heat pretended to be sound, then sound pretended to be heat, and we learned to name what was ours to name. If you are listening to this, and your room keeps getting warmer every night, put your hand on the wall. Count between the ticks if you hear them. Call the person with the name Patch and the quiet eyes. Ask them to look for the habit behind the system. And if you find a note in a chase, write your own, then leave the panel open long enough for the room to remember it can breathe. The night will arrive either way. It is better when it finds you ready, with a glass of water on the radiator and a song in your pocket that knows how to lay its hand gently on the room and say, "We hear you, we're staying. We're going to keep you company until morning cools the world back into something we can bear."